Hello, everyone. Welcome to the TBR webinar series. Today, Principal Analyst Chris Antlitz will be presenting a webinar, Webscales Encroach on Telecom Sector to Realize Value of Digital Economy. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. At the bottom of your screens, you'll see a series of buttons. From left to right, you can access the slides, audio controls, Q&A, speaker bios, a survey, information on the next webinar in our series, including a registration link, an exclusive free trial offer for folks on the webinar who are new to TBR, and a related content widget where you can download the slide deck and access other related materials. These buttons on the bottom of the screen allow you to minimize each window to customize your webinar experience. You can also maximize the slides if you wish to view them in full screen. After the webinar, you'll receive an email with a replay link, as well as a link to view and register for other TBR webinars. If you have any questions for us, please submit them via the Q&A widget in On24. You may also reach out to us after the event at webinars@tbri.com. Thank you again for joining us, and here's Chris to begin the webinar.
Great, thanks Haley, and welcome everyone. So today we're talking about the Webscales, aka hyperscalers. Specifically, we're talking about the biggest ones today, Microsoft, Amazon, Google especially, but we'll also be talking about Apple, Facebook, and a couple of others that are doing some very disruptive things in the telecom industry. So let's get started. That's me, and as Haley mentioned, if you want a copy of the slides, you need to email webinars@tbri.com. The address is at the bottom of this slide. So this is the coverage of the telecom practice at TBR. This is just for syndicated research. This does not include custom research. Today we're talking about the Webscale digital ecosystem market landscape. And the content you're going to see today is from that report. But we also cover 5G, private cellular networks, edge computing, the tier 1 vendors, tier 1 operators with individual reports, and we also cover the telecom infrastructure services market, which is an area that we tend to be known for. We've been covering that market for over a decade. Okay, so I'm going to give a quick overview of what's included in the report so that we understand what we're talking about today and our definitions. So a Webscale is an internet-centric digital platform company that operates ICT environments on a large scale. And these companies, we use the term Webscales, but it's also, these companies are also known as hyperscalers, big tech, or internet content providers. They're called different things, but we're all talking about the same companies. Our report specifically focuses on the big 9, and these are the companies that we believe are going to own the largest, most comprehensive digital ecosystems in the digital era. And specifically, who are those companies? Alibaba, Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Baidu, Facebook, Microsoft, Rakuten, and Tencent. These are what we consider to be the big 9. There's other Webscales. There's all kinds of companies that are also considered Webscales. We'll talk about some of them very briefly. But specifically, these are the 9 companies we're going to be talking about on this call. So want to show a hierarchy of Webscales. So we see 3 tiers that have emerged. There's tier 1, which is the big 9. These are companies that are going to own, already do own, end-to-end digital ecosystems. Tier 2 Webscales are companies that are in multiple categories, but they're not at the level of a full scope ecosystem owner like the big 9. And then tier 3, these are companies that typically are leaders in a specific category. So for example, Airbnb specializes in, they're a platform company for vacation rental properties. And Shopify, Etsy, those types of companies which specialize in small business commerce, as an example. That's what they're known for. Netflix, media and entertainment, specifically. Now, those smaller companies, the tier 2s and 3s, some of them have ambitions to move into the tier 1 category where they're multi-business line, multi-platform ecosystem owners. But as of right now, we don't view them as at the same level as a big 9 Webscale. So we have them, we're not covering them at this point. And in terms of relative market power, the higher tier you go, obviously more market power. But when we talk about market power here, we're talking about levels of influence in a global marketplace that I would argue is unprecedented. The clouds of the big 9, as an example, are so pervasive in the economy and in society now that they have tremendous market presence and market power. These tier 2s and tier 3 Webscales, while they are dominant in their respective categories, they're at a different level compared to tier 1. So I'm trying to draw a distinction here before we jump into the material, just to kind of get a baseline of why are we only covering these 9 and why does it matter? Okay, so big picture, we're going to talk about what we see the big 9 doing. So what they're doing is bringing together physical infrastructure, digital infrastructure, and endpoint devices, and they're owning the stack. When you own that stack, the center of those 3 circles, you can provide to the market an end-to-end digital ecosystem with different types of outcomes. What we see the big 9 doing is transcending every aspect of people's lives, from where they work to their home, to commerce, how they pay for things, health and wellness, communications, transportation, entertainment, running the gamut of all those domains, if you will. The big 9 have plays in each of those categories, and their intention is to, by bringing all of this together, we can enable entirely new business models, entirely new experiences that have only been in science fiction novels. And we'll talk about some of those, where we think some of this is going. I want to show that differently. So the Webscales have initiatives in domains that transcend every aspect of people's lives. Now, I could also draw this same conclusion in the business sector, where we see Webscales are also providing business transformation, critical business services. We could do the same diagram. For this presentation, I'm just going to focus on consumers on this slide. But this is not just consumer. This is also very much business transformation as well. So if we look at Apple, for example, and you plot Apple's various products, services, and other initiatives across those 7 domains, you quickly realize that, hey, they've got a play everywhere in all of the key domains, and they're actively investing in all of these areas. Just in the past Apple California streaming event that they had a couple weeks ago, they spent quite a bit of time talking about their services business in media and entertainment, as well as health and wellness with Apple Fitness Plus, and more investments that are taking place there. I think that's indicative of how this company is moving aggressively beyond their core business, which is selling hardware. They're now selling experiences that transcend different aspects of people's lives. And how that ecosystem comes together is a key part of the value proposition. I could draw the same diagram for any of the big 9. They all have initiatives in these 7 domains. On the consumer side, specifically on the consumer side, we could also draw this distinction on the business side. I want to show this differently. So what we have here is a heat map of the major investment domains and we plotted that across the 9 major web scales. Now, you'll notice there is significant commonality across these companies. And you'll notice also that they are investing in multiple categories within the same company. So look at Amazon, for example, they're almost all green. And versus a Facebook, which is still very much confined to certain areas, but has intentions and is investing to branch out into other domains as they build out their ecosystem beyond just social media. The point I want to stress here is that these companies are all moving, generally speaking, in the same direction, which is to cover all of those domains. And by doing so, you maximize monetization, lifetime value of the end user, and you maximize your margins. I want to make some quick comments about COVID-19. The pandemic forced the world to digitalize, and this has accelerated. It has accelerated digitalization, and not only of businesses, but also of societies. And the web scales we've seen rise up and how important they are as enablers, hastening this transformation of the global economy. Just look at the clouds as an example of how those clouds enable digital transformation for businesses, and how the web scales play a key role in that. The web scales are at all-time high valuations in terms of their market cap, and I think that that's indicative of, underscores how much more powerful they've become in the last year and a half since the pandemic began, and how much the global economy relies on these companies, how important they are to the fabric of the economy and of society. It's very important in terms of the ability for these companies to drive change and influence in the global economy. And lastly, if you add up how much money the big 9 are spending per year on CapEx plus R&D, that number last year amounted to over $300 billion. And that number is growing rapidly at a double-digit rate. That is a tremendous amount of investment for 9 companies to be making per year. That capital is flowing into world-changing endeavors such as autonomous transportation, quantum computing, AR, VR, and AI, among other categories as well. So we're going to move into overall findings, and then we're going to talk specifically about how these companies are disrupting the telecom industry. If folks have questions, add them to the Q&A box, and we'll take them all at the end. We should have enough time to cover quite a few questions. I'm sure there's going to be quite a few. So what we see is the web scale companies are simultaneously moving into multiple trillion-dollar industries, including telecom. And the Industry 4.0 is going to require web scale involvement. These companies need to enter and disrupt trillion-dollar industries because they need to maintain their growth trajectories and maintain their stock valuations. These companies trade on record multiples, and they're at the highest market caps that any company has ever achieved, even if we go back to the tech bubble in the year 2000. It's at a whole different magnitude. But in order to sustain those types of valuations, these companies need to continue growing at strong double-digit rates. And in order for them to do that, they're moving into big categories: healthcare, transportation, financial services, telecom. Each of those industries on a standalone basis is multiple trillions of dollars. Telecom alone is a $2 trillion industry that I would argue is ripe for disruption. These companies are providing capabilities and enabling platforms that are going to make the 4th industrial revolution a reality. We see this with the clouds. but this is now extending into other areas. Microsoft, for example, has Affirm Networks and Metaswitch. They've built a cloud-native 5G core that they're pairing with their edge computing, Azure Edge Stack, to provide digital transformation for companies like manufacturers, exposing low-code, no-code capabilities and tools to the IT departments of those companies to drive digital transformation of the enterprise. That's an example of Industry 4.0. The next major device category is AR/VR. These companies are actively working on AR/VR headsets, so the hardware, the software. Facebook has been very public about the metaverse. This is a real thing. I think by the end of this decade, we might see the smartphone market be eclipsed by AR/VR, just for the sheer amount of use cases that it can unlock in the business domain as well as in the consumer domain. It is unprecedented. And Facebook, Google, Apple, Microsoft, all of those companies are spending billions of dollars each on R&D and technology for the hardware to make this a reality. Okay, so let's go into the telecom industry disruption. So we see Webscales, we see a mega trend converging. The first part of this mega trend is distributed computing, which includes central cloud, edge computing, on-premises computing, and on-device computing. And the Webscales already dominate this space. What is new is intelligent connectivity. This is enabled by distributed computing as well as advancements in 5G and new networking technologies, virtualization, SDN, etc., cloud-native architectures that enable a network to become intelligent, autonomous, self-learning, self-healing. We've seen glimpses of this over the past decade, but I would argue with 5G and some other related technologies that we're at an inflection point. Webscales are moving to the center of this. And this has tremendous implications for telecom operators and the vendor ecosystem because this is extremely disruptive. We estimate that trillions of dollars in economic value is going to be created through this decade from the convergence of these megatrends, and we expect that the Webscale companies are going to be are going to capture an outsized portion of that opportunity. And Webscales, they want to tightly integrate distributed computing and intelligent connectivity and own as much of that stack as possible. By doing so, that gives them control and it enables them to maximize profitability and the market opportunity from this convergence. Okay, so we're going to get into some controversial material now, so want to make that known before we get into it. The Q&A, feel free to leverage that if you want to discuss any of these points at that time. So what we see is we have an inverted value pyramid here in the telecom industry. This should not surprise anybody, the value pyramid. Connectivity has historically been relatively lower value than the applications layer, right? We saw this in the LTE cycle where the Lyfts and Ubers of the world, the Airbnbs of the world were enabled by the connectivity layer, but the value capture went to digital native companies. It did not go, in most cases, to the telcos, right? So what we're saying is that pyramid is going to be very much in play for 5G, the 5G cycle, but the magnitude is going to be far greater. What we see is the Webscales getting very interested in what we call intelligence layer technologies. Now, these are platforms that make intelligent connectivity. And what we see is more and more examples where the Webscales are either buying these platforms, building them internally, or they are partnering to get exposure to these areas. And there's examples of this. So Microsoft bought Azure, bought Affirm Networks and Metaswitch, and recently AT&T's Network Cloud assets. Those are all network intelligence layer technologies. Google has its own RCS platform that it built internally. That is, in our view, that is an intelligence layer technology. It enables intelligence in the network to drive value creation that we were not able to drive from prior generations of cellular technology. Now, the Webscales are also playing in the application layer, obviously. There's social media platforms, there's entertainment platforms, they have communications platforms. There's all kinds of areas where they play in the app space. That will definitely continue. Let's talk about the telcos. Unfortunately for the telcos, what we're seeing is that they're confining themselves to the connectivity layer by ceding the intelligence layer technologies to other players, namely the Webscales. And there are numerous examples of this. We're going to show at least 10 examples of this that have happened within the last year. The lists we're going to be showing are not comprehensive. So in those examples that we're going to be showing, the telco is focusing on the connectivity, and they're either partnering or fully ceding aspects of the intelligence layer to other players in the ecosystem. This threatens telcos because if this continues to play out, it's reasonable to assume that the telcos will remain utility operating companies providing commoditized connectivity services. This is a big threat, and I would argue if we look at the last 10 years with the LTE cycle, that's pretty much what happened. If you look at the where the value went in the LTE cycle, it did, most cases did not accrue to the telcos. Their stock valuations were roughly flat over the past decade, while the growth went to other players. That history is at risk of repeating itself. And we have in the full report, we have different diagrams and data that supports those claims. Okay, so some examples here. So we've got each of the major domains. These are not comprehensive, by the way. These are ones that we have on our radar right now. With more innovation, there's going to be more platforms that enter that radar screen as we move forward. So in the 5G core, we talked about Microsoft. Facebook has an initiative called Project Magma. That's an open source 5G core. AI, ML, analytics, all of the big nine have initiatives here. Google has its contact center AI. It's basically using their Google Assistant algorithms and enabling that for optimizing call center outcomes. But that can be applied to anything. It could be applied to engineering processes. It could be applied to network self-healing. The point is that they have the wherewithal to make these algorithms and embed them into processes to optimize outcomes. CPaaS, there's Azure Communication Services. Nano, Microsoft has a virtual network function manager. That's early days. That's lower on the Etsy Nano stack, but we believe that it makes logical sense that they move up that stack over time as they bring together distributed computing with intelligent connectivity. The NFVO layer at the top of that pyramid would be of keen interest to the Webscales, because that would orchestrate workloads between the distributed cloud and the network infrastructure. RCS, there's Google. They're the biggest player in that space. And then on the RIC side, in the Facebook TIP initiative, there's working groups working on the RIC. The RIC is very interesting for adding intelligence at the access layer of the network, and that we believe is an area that we're going to see more Webscale involvement going forward. Okay, more examples. These are acquisitions that have happened since April 2020. Each of these acquisitions target intelligence layer technologies. Altiostar's Open Virtual RAN. AT&T's network cloud assets are 5G core. NOI is OSS, which is critical for management and orchestration platforms. Metaswitch has elements of IMS, Nano, communications applications for CPaaS and RCS, and Affirmed is 5G core, cloud native 5G core. These are critical acquisitions. The Webscales are going to scale these properties up, and they're going to bring tremendous innovation into the ecosystem from these. We're at the very early stages, but as this decade plays out, we're going to see big disruptive changes from these types of initiatives. Okay, now, apologies for the busyness of this slide, but I really wanted to get all of this in here. This tells a story. So I'm going to go from the bottom up. So starting at the bottom, that is when we go back in time, those are initial relationships between the telco and the Webscale, where we call it cloud services for enterprises. This is where the telco is enhancing the value proposition of its network offering by leveraging the Webscale's cloud. There's examples of that: AT&T NetBond, Verizon Secure Cloud Interconnect, Telefonica with AWS. There's other examples as well. What's happened over the last 2 years is we've seen the scope of these partnerships broaden significantly. We moved to cloud migration. Telcos started using aspects of Webscale's clouds to run IT and or network workloads. So think about AT&T's relationship with Microsoft, where back office IT functions are running in Azure. Now, with the most recent partnership there, now Microsoft's going to be running some of the network workloads that run AT&T's core network. We also have the inception of edge compute partnerships. This is where the telco typically will rent space in its facilities, could be a central office or an ag hub, et cetera, and they let the Webscale co-locate the edge stack in those locations. There's usually a revenue sharing arrangement in place for those. The telco's typically only getting a portion of the revenue there for providing the connectivity aspect, as well as they get the rent. What we see is that in most cases, the Webscale owns the customer relationship and they provide the value-added capabilities over the networks. So it's an example of going over the top, just another version of it, this time at the edge. And then the most comprehensive partnerships we've seen is what we call intelligence layer platform partnerships. This is where the telco goes all in or partially in on a Webscale's intelligence layer technologies. There are many examples of this. This is already happening. With RCS and Google, T-Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T have all jumped in with Google for RCS. AT&T's arrangement, 1&1, their arrangement with Rakuten for Symphony, for RCP, now called Symphony. That's another example where a telco is adopting a comprehensive Webscale solution for a core network business aspect. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this, this reliance on Webscales. I think part of this is because there's an if you can't beat them, join them mentality that we see among the telcos. Basically what is being implied here is that the Webscales have already built these platforms. They're proven. They're able to innovate in a more agile manner. It's in the telco's best interest, at least from a short-term or near-term perspective, to align with that as in a partnership model so that they can derive some of the benefits riding on the coattails of the Webscale. There's other reasons as well. I think that business customers are requiring compatibility and pre-integration between telco and Webscale platforms to drive their initiatives, and the telcos want to align with their customers, especially when we think about B2B value creation from 5G and edge computing. This is an area that they have to be in. So there's a pressure to partner with these companies, even if this means that there's a very real risk of complete disruption. Okay, so I did leave plenty of time for Q&A for this because I'm sure there's going to be plenty of questions. So we can jump into the Q&A now, and I see there are some questions there. I'm going to start from the first question here. Can you please explain your statement, the next major device category is AR/VR? Sure. So I believe that by the end of this decade, we might be delayed a couple years from that because of the chip shortage. That is delaying some of the roadmaps. But generally speaking, AR/VR has the potential to eclipse the market opportunity that smartphones enabled. We're talking about, hundreds of billions of dollars in market opportunity on the hardware side, potentially alone. And how could that be the case? How is that possible? Most people think about AR/VR for gaming and entertainment, but actually, I would argue that some of the larger opportunities are actually in the enterprise space. Today, we see companies like Microsoft with HoloLens selling digital transformation AR/VR solutions for government applications, for enterprises where they're being used in factory environments for worker safety, for employee training. Those are key use cases. If you think about healthcare, telehealth, how a doctor could be present in someone's living room to prescribe medicine or talk through a problem. That whole idea of holograms and how that actually would be enabled, this all falls under our category of AR/VR, and I think the potential is huge. And actually, Mark Zuckerberg has been very public with how pervasive the metaverse, which is the culmination of the virtual worlds that are being created. Think about entities like Roblox as an example, or Facebook Horizon, which are elements of the metaverse today, and how those might enable transformation across industries, as well as in the 7 domains of consumer lives that we talked about. So the potential is massive. There are some, if you look at what the Webscales have been working on to date, Facebook recently came out with smart glasses in conjunction with Ray-Ban. Those got some play on the business news wires. That's an early stage of what's coming. First of all, the technology in those Ray-Ban glasses is way more advanced than what Google Glasses was back in 2013. Way, way more advanced. It shows how fast the innovation cycles are occurring in this domain. And if you look at the roadmap comments that the Webscales have made about AR/VR, we're going to start to see big announcements within the next 3 years. I would equate it to the impact that Steve Jobs made when he first introduced the iPhone in 2007. It's going to be that level of market impact and market potential. And we're going to see that by the middle of this decade, we're going to start to see that. The next question is, what's your take on Webscale's impact on edge and on-premise use cases? So if we go back to that idea of distributed computing, and actually I'm going to go back to that slide. So the Webscales are already building out the edge. This is already happening. They have relationships with telcos where they're putting edge stacks in. Amazon calls it the wavelengths or outposts, and Microsoft has Azure Edge Stack. Azure Stack Edge, and they have an on-premise version. There's local edge zones. These are essentially edge computing locations where they're extensions of the central cloud, interface with the central cloud, but they also provide low latency capabilities in a specific market area. We're at the early stages of the build out. We do think there's going to be a ramp in infrastructure investment over the next 3 to 5 years, where we're going to see a shift from emphasis on central cloud investment to edge cloud investment. Last year, the Webscales collectively spent around $50 billion on central cloud. We expect them to be spending $50 billion on edge cloud by the middle of this decade. So just to give you an idea of how much money are we talking here, and the number of sites will be, it's going to be highly distributed, all types of locations. It'll be on premise of an enterprise premise. It could be in a telco facility. It could be in a stadium, like the NFL stadiums. It could be in a central office. There's all kinds of locations. A base of cell tower is going to be a key one. All types of locations where this edge infrastructure will be located. Today, there's examples of this, right? Microsoft has a 5G manufacturing transformation deal with Inventec in Taiwan. In that solution, they're providing the edge on premise. So that's an example of an edge. It happens to be a private edge specific for that manufacturer, but there's also going to be the public edge and the hybrid edge, which is being built out as well. And in terms of use cases for that, so if we talk about the Microsoft Inventec deal, where that's an on-prem edge stack, that's enabling worker safety use cases. That's enabling predictive maintenance. It's enabling robots to move inventory across the floor, the factory floor. There's several use case categories that Inventec is using. That got built, I think it was either earlier this year or late last year, I think was when they started building that, building out that's commercial. That's a commercial, it's in commercial use on the production environment, what they built there. And then on the telco edge side, where you have telco and Webscale, those are more on the public or hybrid cloud side, edge cloud side. Use cases vary, but one of the ones we see a lot of is security and data residency. So, for example, I know that Lumen is a big player in California, aligning with the government, the state government's rules around healthcare data needing to reside in that state. And they work with Lumen and other telcos as well, in conjunction with Webscale companies to align with those requirements. So there are examples of that. And then in Europe, of course, you have the EU requirements around where that data resides. Those are other use cases for justifications for deploying edge infrastructure. The low latency use cases are going to come. Today, if you look at NFL stadiums, I would argue that there are use cases already available. So Verizon is hot on this, where you can enable different experiences for the fans in the park, and leveraging 5G and MEC to do that. So there's a bunch of examples of this in the public, the private side, and in the hybrid side. Okay, any other questions? And Haley, am I missing any questions? I'm looking at the, I don't know if any came in through the chat function instead.
I think that we've got them all.
Okay, great. Well, hope everybody enjoyed this presentation, and I'll hand it back to Haley.
All right, everyone. Please feel free to reach out to Chris with any follow-up questions. If you have a few moments, it would be greatly appreciated if you could please fill out the survey that's going to pop up on your screen. A replay version of the webcast will be available after the event and will be sent out to you via email. To view a list of our upcoming and past webinars, please visit tbri.com. And please be sure to join us on Wednesday, September 29th for How Ecosystems Turn Cloud Technology into Solutions. You can register using the link on the console. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.